This is Lady B, and I'm back. Now, I was planning on posting this video last week, but I had some trouble with my computer, so I'm doing it this week, even though this is the week of Thanksgiving, and I had planned to take this week off. So you're getting it anyway. Little extra work for me. I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be about how to make tips and tricks for making your fruit pies from frozen fruit rather than fresh. There are people who will tell you you shouldn't do it. They say you should always use fresh. Well, unless you picked that fruit yourself, the fruit in the store is often picked green and then ripened on the way to the store, and so it actually doesn't have as much flavor in it as the frozen does. And so I prefer to use frozen, and there is ways to do it. You just have to do a few things. Now, if you don't live in the US, you might be wondering why I'm talking about pies. In the US, we have, of course, our big Thanksgiving dinner, and pies are a big part of that. It's the traditional dessert. And we'll make pumpkin pies and fruit pies and chocolate pies and whatever pies suit your fancy. Well, fruit is something that my family does enjoy having for pies. So I will be making a blueberry pie from frozen, and I am going to show you how it's done. So the first tip, the first trick is your fruit from frozen will have more juices released from them, which is why they tell you to use fresh. But you can work around that if, starting with the crust, you add a little extra shortening or butter or whatever it is you put in your crust. You want to add 1 or 2 tablespoons more, or just use a crust recipe that is higher in fats. This will create a little bit of protection for those extra juices to keep you from getting a soggy crust. So I am actually doing the second in this case. I have done the first. Like I said, just add an extra 1 or 2 tablespoons to your pie crust recipe. Make it a little, bring that fat up a little bit. But in this case, I'm actually going to be making, it's called a cream cheese crust. Now, I'm not actually using cream cheese. I am using substitutes, but the concept is exactly the same. The key is the fat content. So the first thing I need to do, and this recipe will actually make me 2 crusts. It will make 2 8 or 9 inch crusts, or 1 9 or 10 inch, 10 or 11 inch tart crust. But I'm doing a pie crust, and I'll just be saving the other half of this for a different pie later, because we get a lot of people for Thanksgiving and we make a lot of pies. But my first 2 ingredients are my cream cheese. Like I said, this is not actually cream cheese, but it is close enough. And for this, it's 8 ounces, and that goes in my bowl here. And then I need 1 cup of butter. Now, this is not butter, this is margarine. You cannot substitute with standard margarine. You have to buy what this is, which is a margarine that is specifically formulated as a baking stick, as a replacement for butter in baking. If you use standard margarines with this, it will not turn out. It will be too watery. They beat a lot of water into these standard margarines. But the baking sticks, they keep that fat content very close to actual butter. So if you use a substitute like this, make sure you get the right one. But this is 2 sticks or 1 cup. This is very fatty. So I have those 2 in my pan, and I just need to, either using a hand blender or a fork, which is what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to cream these together. Now, it's very important when you do this that both of these ingredients be at room temperature, or this is going to be extremely difficult to do. But at room temperature, it actually comes together very, very easily. And there I go. Even with just a fork, that only took me 1 to 2 minutes. That's been creamed together. So now I need to add my flour and my salt. Now, it recommends sifting the flour and the salt directly into it together. I don't bother sifting. I probably should, but I don't. So, now, part of the reason I don't bother sifting is because I actually use a gluten-free flour mix, which is significantly finer than standard flours. And I have found that I don't need to sift this. If you are using a standard all-purpose wheat flour, do take the time to sift. So that's 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And there's 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now you're supposed to sift the salt and the flour together, so I'm going to just kind of mix the salt into the flour because I didn't sift it. So now I want to just mix this all together until it can form into a ball. And I just do it until it comes together. We don't overhandle it. This is just like standard pie. If you want that pie crust to be flaky, you want to make sure and handle it as little as possible, which is why we do it with a fork or a pastry cutter and not by hand, because the warmth of your hand will continue to melt those butters and, in this case, cream cheese, heat that up, and it will make your crust more tough. You want to keep that tender, flaky crust. And this is true whether you are doing this recipe or any other pie crust recipe. You handle it as little as possible. Now, in this recipe, because there is so much fat, if it feels too sticky when you try to form it into a ball, you can add more flour, but it doesn't take a lot to make a difference. So the recipe itself says to only add it a teaspoon at a time. But this is together, if you can see that, and I know I'll be able to form this into a ball very easily. So now I'm going to take some plastic wrap, put this in my plastic wrap, and I'm going to refrigerate it till it's nice and firm, at least a half an hour. And I will see you then. So it has been a little over an hour. I doubled the amount of time I let my crust dough chill in the fridge because I made it with a gluten-free flour. And gluten-free flour, if you've worked with it, you probably already know this, but it takes longer to hydrate than wheat flour does. So I doubled that time. For most of you, if you're using a wheat flour, half an hour should be enough. Now I have already rolled out my crust for my single crust on that. And I have rolled it out between 2 sheets of wax paper to make it really easy to transfer it to my pie tin, Pyrex. So all I have to do is peel off my top layer of wax paper. I'm going to place this upside down on here, pick the whole thing up, press it into it, flip it over, and then I can push it down into the sides, get everything even, and peel off my next layer of wax paper. I rolled it out 1 to 1.5 inches larger than the size of my pie tin container. Is it called a tin when it's glass? Well, whatever you call it. So that it would fit inside it. And I do have extra here off the sides. So I'm going to fold that back over the top and I'm going to flute it with a fork. Prettiest crust I have ever done, but this is a much softer dough than I'm used to working with, So as I've said before, I wanted to handle it as little as possible, so I kept it really simple. So the next step now is to waterproof the crust on the inside as much as possible, or moisture proof it. Now there's a few ways to do this. You can heat up some jam and wipe the inside with it, or a fruit glaze of some kind. You can beat an egg and do an egg wash right on the inside. You can even take sugar, and if you want to, you can take a little orange or lemon zest and mix it in with the sugar, and then sprinkle it over your crust and put it in the oven just long enough for the sugar to start melting. Or if you're doing, say, a cream pie, you could, which this is a fruit pie, so you're not going to do this, but another method that is sometimes used for cream pies or your the lemon meringues is to melt some chocolate and do a layer of chocolate on the inside. Now for this one, I am going to be using an egg wash. I have here 1 egg that has been beaten with 1 tablespoon of water, and I'm going to wash the inside of my crust with this. So there it is with the wash. It's gone all the way around the sides and even up onto the edges, so that will brown up nice and golden in the oven. At least that's the plan. So now I need to assemble my filling. So I have here my 4 cups of blueberries. Now, fruit that's been frozen often will have little ice crystals on it. So it's important that you rinse it off with cold water to get those ice crystals off, and then set it to dry slightly in a colander for just a few minutes before using it. It's also important that you rinse it before you measure it, because those ice crystals can sometimes make a huge difference in how accurate your measurement is. So I rinsed this, then I measured it, and then I have set it to dry over a bowl to catch any ice that perhaps didn't get rinsed off that needed to drip off. So there it is. I have here 1 cup of sugar, to which I have added a pinch of salt, cinnamon, and nutmeg. And to this I need to add my starch, either tapioca or cornstarch, but for this I want a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons. Now the original recipe actually only called for 3 tablespoons. This is another adjustment you make that helps you with these frozen fruits. You want to add at least 1 extra tablespoon of your thickener to bind up the extra juices you're going to get from having used frozen fruit. So I'm going to, using my fork, I'm going to blend this all together to make sure that there are no lumps. I'm getting it thoroughly mixed. I toss this to coat, so everything is coated. Doesn't that look lovely? There we go. So I also need to add 2 tablespoons or 1 ounce of lemon juice to this, and that will add some really nice flavor too. Okay, so that is my pie ready to go into the oven. I have not put a lattice or a top crust on it because I have cooked it from frozen. This is another tip. When you cook the frozen fruit, you want to leave it open so that any extra moisture can evaporate as it's cooking. You can put a lattice work on it or maybe some little details, but you want to leave it as open as possible. I like to just leave it completely off. So I have already preheated my oven to 425. I will start cooking by putting this in the lower third of the oven. After 15 minutes, it will move to the center, and then I'll drop the temperature to 350 and cook it for an additional 35 to 40 minutes, keeping a close eye on it toward the end there to make sure that my crust doesn't burn and needs perhaps a little tin foil around it to protect it. I will see you after that point. And it's finished. Now, I think perhaps I should have put the tin foil around my crust about 5 minutes before I actually did, but it looks and smells so good. And look at how beautiful the bottom of the crust looks, just nice and golden brown. So now it's just time to taste it. Now, this is to be served at either room temperature or warm with a sweet whipped topping or a cream sauce on top. Now, I don't have either of those at the moment, but I can't wait to try this. So, let's see if we manage to keep from having a soggy crust on the bottom. Oh, but this is so delicious. I'm gonna try a little bit of this crust. It's actually the first time I've ever made this particular crust. It was perfectly flaky. Just delicious, melts in the mouth. There we have it, a blueberry pie made from frozen blueberries, and the filling is just delicious. And the crust, well, while the bottom is perhaps not as flaky as it is up here, when is it ever? It is still quite delicious. So good. So this Thanksgiving season, or any other time when you'd like to make pies, and specifically fruit pies, just remember that you can make them from frozen, and it turns out oh so good. You know, I think that may be one of the best pies I've made in a long time. Absolutely delicious. So I want to give a quick shout out to where this recipes came from. This is The Perfect Pie by Susan G. Purdy. If you like to make pies, I recommend this book. Buy it, you will not regret it. I bought it and then I loved it so much I got rid of all my other cookbooks for making pies. It was just that good. So, I love you all, whether new or old. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Until then, whether making pies for Thanksgiving or any other occasion, just remember, don't be afraid to suit yourself and make whatever it is you do exclusively you. I'm going to finish this. I can't stop eating, it's so good. Let's see if I can get that on my spoon. Here we go. Okay. I didn't make a very big piece, but I could not stop eating that. That is so delicious.